Pitter patter, let's get at her. It is a special edition of the Manely Broncos podcast, and you're probably wondering why. Well, it's not Wednesday, it's Monday. It's to kick off the entire week, and we're doing a show right here on the MHRT Network. And make sure you hit the subscribe button over at the MHRT Network, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We have a lot of shows, obviously, throughout the week. Obviously, Manely has always predominantly, pun intended, Stephen, predominantly been there on Wednesdays at 7:30, but because it's a special episode, we're going to do it on Wednesday or on Monday tonight at 7:30 because we have Steven joining us, and he's kind enough to join us. We're going to be spending it strictly, if you will, on the salary cap, and probably I feel like you can't necessarily also talk about one without the other, so we're going to at least, of course, have some free agency discussion, continue the theme of free agency, and that we've been talking about as far as like positions and stuff like that to look after. And anybody that may not necessarily know Steven, he actually was a writer with us over at Predominantly Orange, and he knows his stuff. Like, he absolutely knows his stuff. He is a salary cap. I feel like I'm pandering a little bit. I don't necessarily know if he's a salary cap wizard, but he certainly knows his stuff when it comes to the salary cap. So Steven, thank you so much, man, for hopping on and getting the chance to not just talk about the salary cap, of course, but of course the Broncos.
Definitely. Well, appreciate you having me here. And I wouldn't call myself a salary cap wizard by any stretch of the imagination, but as a fan, one of the things that has always caught my interest is kind of the business side of football. So it is something I've taken a lot of time studying and playing with all the websites and really understanding. And so I wouldn't call myself a wizard, but I could talk about it pretty knowledgeably. So happy to be here. Happy to chat with you and answer any questions. And most of all, talk to Broncos. So.
Yeah, and actually, you said it. Questions. If anybody actually has a salary cap question or a Broncos related question for Steven or I, feel free to drop it in the chat. If you guys are watching on X or Twitter, you guys can actually comment now. I mean, comments from X will show up. So basically, the days of Periscope are back. Those comments that you see down there, through the stream will show up on our live stream. So that's nice to see. We are also on Twitch as well, that you guys can stream there over on Twitch on the MHRT Network. We're on Facebook Live over on the MHRT Network and the Manely Broncos page. We got you guys covered no matter what. So I guess to lead it off for me is I feel like you and I briefly had the conversation before we went live. But I feel like it's appropriate to have the conversation because so many people blow up our notifications, yours, mine. I see Big Mike in the chat, right? I'm sure that people have blown up, his notifications over there on Twitter. But it's just like, I feel like so many times people have this conversation of, well, the Broncos aren't going to have any salary cap. They're going to have any money to spend. They aren't going to have, anything to spend on anybody, if you will. But that said, they still will have that cash dilemma. So my question for you, Steven, is that one of the biggest misconceptions about the salary cap? Is that difference between the salary cap in general versus the actual cash that you can spend?
Yeah, definitely. The way the cap works, it's all an accounting game. So when do you account for things? Being able to put down a lot of cash up front can really help you in that specific year, not account for your entire payment that year, and bring that down. So, that is definitely a common misconception that just because you start right now with maybe negative cap space, there's a couple ways that they can clear that, tomorrow if they wanted to, and end up with $40-50 million worth of cap space. They can also start the free agency period with $15 million in cap space and go on a spree and sign 5 free agents by manipulating the cap. So there's always ways that they can clear things. There's always things that can be done with deals to to lower that hit, especially in that given year. Now that hurts you in future years, but that's where having that cash on hand and being able to consistently do that year over year, you can kind of get around that. We've seen the Saints do it for years. Other teams that are very cash heavy, the Rams consistently do it. There's a lot of teams like that. Now, you haven't consistently seen the Broncos do that, especially under John Elway. They were always very conscious of having a lot of cap space, being very you wouldn't call them
Frugal,
cheap
right?
by any stretch, but being very mindful of where they're at with the cap and keeping a good cap situation. So there's good and bad to that, but with the Walton Group, I think you just saw it last year. They doled out more cash and guaranteed future money in first day of free agency than any team in the league. So I think that we're in a bit of a new era here with the Broncos, which is kind of exciting, right? Having all that money, being able to look at it on paper this time of year and be like, well, they're not really going to be players in free agency, and maybe not being players in free agency means one big swing, two big swings, and a couple minor deals. Like I said, they could get themselves into a position if they want to be able to make multiple big swings like they did last year. So I'm really excited to see what they do.
I feel like maybe one of like the better ways too that they could possibly figure out a way to divvy up the cash, or any way that they could be able to figure that out is, I feel like maybe one of the best examples that I can come up with. Sadly, it's a rival, but I think of when the Kansas City Chiefs had what was it, roughly like $500,000 to $750,000 in cap space, keyword cap space, but yet they still, and this is funny, and now that Chris Jones is a free agent again, but they were able to sign Chris Jones to that really lengthy contract extension. And if I'm not mistaken, that was after Patrick Mahomes signed his big, massive, $500 million deal with the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yep. I mean, you see it every year. The Saints were, 70 million, 80 million over the cap starting this time last year. They were still able to extend guys. They were still able to sign people in free agency. Like, every team, understand, every team has a cap guy. Every team has a plan for this time of year. So nobody at any given team is freaking out about where they sit against the cap. They're just they have a plan. They're going to execute on it, and they'll always get under. And they might not be big spenders, but they have a plan to get under and stay under, so they don't get in trouble.
One of the things for me, I feel like, because it's different for us. Like, if you're playing video games and you're going through and you're working the salary cap yourself on Madden, but you're seeing yourself in the red, it's a little bit more alarming for yourself than necessarily being like an NFL executive, kind of manipulating the salary cap in that regard. I also feel like, one of the things that would be helpful for people to understand too, and you've talked about this before, sometimes even at length, but the difference between front loading a contract and back loading a contract, because that's one of the other ways that you can also, possibly find that, that way to manage the cap or massage the cap, in a way to still be able to make some other moves, right?
Yeah. And I think it's a good point you make, and it's something that we should look at when you start seeing the headlines, right? 5-year, $200 million. Like, don't pay too much attention to what the headline sees. You got to really look at what the details are. Even the average annual value isn't necessarily, the biggest deal. So it might be important to a guy from a reputation standpoint to say, I want the highest average in the league at my position, or top 5 or top 3 or whatever. So there's ways you can manipulate this contract to give him what he wants without really giving him what he wants. So you want to look at, that goes into front loading and back loading, right? So the first thing, we'll talk about front loading and why you might do that. So when you talk about front loading, really the keys to look at in a contract are always going to be number of years, not because of how many years that person's going to be under contract, but how long you can actually spread that prorated bonus. And then you want to look at guaranteed money. and you want to look at the guaranteed money over the course of, you want to look at the number of years that's actually guaranteed, because then you can see what the actual average value of that contract is. So if you got a guy like, somebody that wants to be paid the highest in the league, you can give them a nice signing bonus, give them a decent year 2 salary, but nothing else is guaranteed. Now you're talking about looking at the first 2 years of that contract, taking that, divide that by 2. That's your real average value. But you can start putting these massive salaries in years 3, 4, 5, whatever, that are that if you look at it over the course of 5 years, brings the AAV way up and gets him into a good light. That's more for perception than it is reality, if that makes sense. Back to kind of why you would front load a contract. The reason you would do that is because you want to pay out that first year is going to be primarily bonus money, because you get to prorate that across the course of the deal. So if you have a 5-year deal and you give the guy a $25 million signing bonus and a $2 million salary, he's getting $27 million in year 1, but only $5 million of that $25 million actually counts against the cap plus the salary. So instead of a $27 million cap hit, you have a $7 million cap hit, which is obviously much more manageable. So, front loading those contracts with fat signing bonuses and being able to account for them over the course of the deal is a good way to sign free agents when you don't have a lot of money. Cap money.
Yeah. So I feel like one of the other things that is a topic of conversation, let's talk about the Russell Wilson stuff of this, because this is another part of a contract, because there's so many layers of contracts I feel like that people can still possibly get out of. And we're not here to necessarily talk about the Russell Wilson situation, but just so much so that, like, in terms of the salary cap, that injury guarantee, right? That's another part of a deal that they can possibly get out of a certain contract, right? In fact, I think the injury guarantee, and maybe it was the same injury clause that the Dallas Cowboys, we're going to go a little bit Broncos related to on another player. The Dallas Cowboys, I feel like we're wanting to put an injury clause on Randy Gregory's contract, and Randy Gregory was at least smart to read the fine print and realize, I did not necessarily want that. And the Broncos obviously, maybe not necessarily gave it to him, but they were able to at least sign him to a much more manageable contract that they were at least able to easily get out of, right?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically the Randy Gregory situation. I know you are correct. It was something to do with the injuries, but maybe I don't remember what the holdup was, but it had Randy pretty sour enough to renege on his deal and sign with the Denver Broncos. So whether that was good or bad, I don't know. Seemed like it worked out good in the very beginning, but didn't go very well over the course of the deal. So, but I don't remember what that part was. In terms of Russell Wilson, so Russell's deal, and this is somewhat standard with quarterback contracts or some of these very large deals, is you won't guarantee, and this is the difference between fully guaranteed at signing and guaranteed for injury, is you won't guarantee those years until a certain point triggers. So in this instance, it is the 5th day of the league year, I believe, which is coming up here in just a couple weeks, where if he's on the roster, his 25 salary guarantees. Now, why is that a problem for the Broncos? Because once that guarantees, what happens when you cut that player is you still have to pay him. So there's a difference between dead cap and actually having to pay a guy to not play for you. And teams don't care as much as fans do about the dead cap, because that's money that's been paid already. All you got to do is actually recognize it against your cap in the year that you cut them. So what happens when a player is cut, if you go back to my example where you gave him a $25 million bonus, right? Every year you get $5 million that you get to count against your cap. for that $25 million bonus that was paid up front. Let's say you move on after year 2, so you have accounted for 10 of that $25 million. That $15 million that you still have yet to account for comes due in the form of dead cap. But if you don't have any guaranteed money to go with it, that's your dead cap. You move on. You're not actually paying for him. You're just accounting for him on your sheet, right? Accounting for him in your cap space. It's painful, but it's not the end of the world. It does suck a lot worse when you have guaranteed money, because then not only did Russell Wilson get a bunch of bonuses that were prorated, right? On top of that, he's got his 24 salary already guaranteed. And if he were to still be on the Broncos the 5th day of the league year, then his 25 salary would be guaranteed. So you'd actually be paying him all that money, his 24 and 25 salary, plus taking the dead cap, and that's your cap number. And that's why you see it being so costly to get out of this Russell Wilson deal. So to avoid having to pay him his 25 salary, the chances are probably a 99% probability the Broncos will be releasing Russell Wilson and getting out of that before that extra money triggers. That doesn't mean that they don't owe him his 24 salary. They will be paying him his 24 salary plus accounting for all the dead cap along with it. Now, when they account for that dead cap is to be determined. If they determine they want to do that after June 1st, then technically that dead cap portion would actually roll into the next year, and they're just paying his salary this year. So his cap number actually wouldn't change whether he's on the roster or off the roster this year. If they cut him with a post for June 1st designation, if they cut him and want to take the whole thing, then it's about $85 million in dead cap, which part of that is $39 million of that they're actually paying him to not play. So it is very painful.
One of the things
I see a
go
comment.
ahead. Yes. You saying?
Do you want me to get? Am I here? Got some. Yeah. So can you all explain how void years work? Yes, I can. So a void year is essentially a year that doesn't actually mean anything or matter.
We're looks like we're a bit. It's a bit
I got
choppy,
you. My back.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, cool. All right, back to void years. So they're dummy years that don't count. So let's say I want to give a guy a 2-year deal. I'm going to give him 2 years plus an extra void year. That means I get to take that bonus I give in year 1 and extend it over 3 years instead of 2. That means you're automatically going to have a dead cap charge of something in that year 3 for a guy that's not playing for you. Does that make sense?
So how much of that does that also correlate to this idea of a club option and a player option as well? Or is that different?
An option year?
Yeah, like when
so
in terms of the void
options,
years.
Yeah, so option years are a little bit different. So void years are automatically they're just dummy years. They don't mean anything. They're there specifically to be able to take a lesser cap hit in that first year. Option years, you have like an option bonus that you can pay out. It's generally similar to like Russell Wilson's injury guarantee. They usually trigger at a certain point, and once you pick up that bonus, it's essentially you're just giving him part of his salary for free. So the reason players like that, right, is because you have to commit to these options sooner, which means the bonuses get paid out sooner. The way NFL players get paid, they get their base salary a week at a time in season. So they get 18. We're now in an 18-week season, so they get 18 game checks, one of every week of the regular season. So if you can get them to pay you of your total cash for that year, let's say your base salary is $10 million and you have a $5 million option bonus. You get them to pick up your option in March. Now they got to pay you $5 million. So regardless, you're getting that $5 million guaranteed, and they're going to have to pay $5 million against the cap because that cash exchange hands in that year, option bonuses generally do not get prorated unless you convert them into signing bonus, which you can always do. But it's just a way to help the player get some of his money sooner and make the team more vested in you. Once you've paid someone $5 million in March, you are less likely to cut them in August because you've already invested money into them in that year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it seems fitting. Obviously, this is a very popular question. This is a question that obviously Bronco fans themselves would like to know, is that who are possible restructures? And it's actually worth mentioning before we even talk about this, Stephen, the salary cap. The NFL announced that the 2024 salary cap, this is from Tom Pelissero, will be $255.4 million per club, with an additional $74 million per club payment for player benefits, which includes performance-based pay and benefits for retired players. Now, I think that I would probably speak for the Broncos themselves in saying that the fact that it's going up that much from where it was, which is, if I'm not mistaken, about a 30 million jump, if I'm not mistaken, that benefits the Broncos in so many ways when we talk about the restructures, or possibly even moving on from Russell Wilson, about possibly maybe taking on just a little bit more of his dead cap.
Yeah, they got money back. That's essentially it. Everyone likes to get money back, so or more money in the bank, whatever you want to call it. It's because, and the reason that happened is, we saw something happen that we really haven't seen under Roger Goodell, which, with the COVID situation a couple of years ago, we actually saw the cap go down year over year in 1 year. They were really holding back a lot of those profits to make sure that they didn't they didn't go sideways on their books, but they held back too much. There was still TV revenue coming in. Those NFL games were probably never more popular than when they were played in front of empty stadiums, because people had nothing else to do but watch the game. So they still made money hand over fist during COVID. So, as part of that revenue share, they got to give some of that money back to the players, which is why you see the cap go up.
Again, we have Stephen, as you can see, joining us. We are talking about the salary cap and explaining the salary cap just a little bit more. One of the restructures, of course, would possibly, it seems like this has been a really popular name, even though they recently just signed him this last year, would be Mike McGlinchey, right? Mike McGlinchey possibly as a restructure candidate.
Oh yeah, any of those guys that signed last year would be a good restructure candidate. I see Graham popping up with Tim Patrick restructure, perhaps. Let's talk about the difference between a restructure and a pay cut, because they're two very different things, and it's something I have to correct people on Twitter all the time. Say, restructures are actually really good for the players, and let me tell you why. So a restructure is basically you're getting someone that's still going to be on your books for a while. You're just taking their base salary and you're going to convert it to a signing bonus. So it's great because the player actually gets all their money up front. They don't have to wait for the season. Cash now is better than cash later. It's a financial principle that pretty much everybody should live by. So they get their money up front, and then the team actually gets to, basically prorate now that bonus once again over the life of the cap. Now, what that does is just pushes some of that money out to future years. The Saints do this all the time. This is generally how they get from 80 million over to under enough to sign a couple guys, is by just restructuring all their guys, paying them up front, and then pushing some of that cap charge out. It also, for the players, makes it a little bit more difficult for the team to get out of those deals, because now your dead cap is even higher if you cut a guy, say, year 3 after restructuring in year 2. So again, it makes the team a little bit more vested in that player, and a little bit less likely to cut him down the line. So they definitely like that. Now, a Tim Patrick restructure wouldn't be a restructure. That would be an example of a straight pay cut. Like we are not going to we are going to cut you if you are not actually taking less money, which is very different. The players don't like it. Sometimes they will go for it. Tim Patrick very well could go for something like that. The guy hasn't played in 2 years. I love Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick is a fantastic player. We have no idea what Tim Patrick is going to look like coming off of an ACL and an Achilles and not having played football in 2 years. Is he going to be anywhere near the same player? We have no idea. So to act like he should be getting his full salary. So what we would see with Tim Patrick is we would say, hey, hey, Tim, we're going to, this is the number we're comfortable paying. They're actually going to redo that contract and lower that base salary down. They may say, hey, we want you for $2 million. We'll guarantee the 2, but that's all we're going to pay you. And then his agent's thinks he can get on the market, right? His agent's like, nah, man, I can get you $5 million on the market. Okay, great. Then they're going to cut him, and then he's going to be a free agent. He can go sign for more. But generally, when and that's when you see guys actually take pay cuts is generally when there's the example of like Peyton Manning in 2015 where, if somebody had cut him, if Broncos had cut Peyton Manning, he'd have got way more money. Peyton just wanted to win a Super Bowl and take a little bit less money to do it with Denver. That's pretty rare. Generally, it's, hey, man, we're going to cut you, and you're, go see what your options are. If you think you can do better, and you want to leave, go ahead. We'll cut you loose. But in this situation, they're generally looking at the market. Their agents putting out feelers. It's like, hey, I don't think we're going to do any better than this. Why don't you go ahead and sign it so we have a job? And that's generally where you see those guys accept those pay cuts.
So in terms of continuing the theme a little bit about those restructures, because obviously it's more than just one player. It's more than just the Tim Patrick. We briefly mentioned Mike McGlinchey. I'm guessing that would be a case with McGlinchey where it would be converted to a signing bonus, right? As far as the contract of that.
Yeah, those guys aren't really cut. Guys that can be cut because they got such a big signing bonus, it would generally actually screw the cap space situation to cut them. And they're guys you want on the team. Like that's, you're generally not going to restructure people that you don't want to be there. You're just going to you're restructuring guys that you foresee being around for another couple of years. So any of those guys that signed those deals last year, those are the best candidates because they have the most years left on their deal, which means they can cut that bonus by more digits, essentially. They got 4 years left on their deal. They get to prorate that over 4 years, making that salary cap number as low as possible. To restructure a guy that has 1 year left on his deal doesn't make any sense because if it's the last year of his deal, it doesn't matter. That might be a situation where you add a void year and do it, or 2 void years to cut. Hey, I know I'm going to want this guy, but only for this year. I'm going to give him 2 void years. We're going to pay his salary this year up front and cut it in third, and then we're going to take 2/3 of it next year where we have more cap space.
So obviously none of us are in the mind of Garrett Bowles, but Garrett Bowles has been a conversation too, as far as possibly taking a restructure from the Denver Broncos. But it really seems like from everything that we've been reading and hearing, it seems he's been not inclined to even take a restructure. Why do you think it in Garrett Bowles' situation, why he would refrain from the idea of taking a restructure?
I don't think they propose a restructure to Garrett. No. That would be my guess. Generally, you don't want to guys don't care about getting restructured when you're just moving money, same year money forward. That doesn't bother guys. It's generally good. So they want to do something. I mean, restructure can mean a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Like technically a pay cut is a restructure. Technically pushing back an injury guarantee 6 months is a restructure, which they asked Russell Wilson to do. So there's a lot of ways you can restructure. when I talk about restructures, I generally talk about that as like a pretty normal restructure, which is converting either an option payment or an option bonus or a salary to their question.
Yeah. Graham even brings up possibly the Russell Wilson situation, and could it leave a bad taste in the mouths of the team's current players?
Sure.
You know, because I mean, I will say it did come out. What was it? I was gonna say it did come out. What was it in terms of the conversation? Again, we don't want to dive too much into that, but it did say that Cortland Sutton was the only person that he talked about as far as everything that was going on, and them possibly moving on from him, or even the whole idea of benching him. So, I mean, if you're only telling one person, that could possibly leave a bad taste in terms of maybe the other players that are on that football team, because you're only singling out one person instead of necessarily the entire team.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think it's going to depend on who you're talking to, right? I mean, Russell Wilson alienated a lot of guys that don't make a lot of money, especially the year he got here. I mean, this guy is buying a mansion that has 29 bathrooms or whatever. He's get his own office on the front office floor. Like, that's alienating behavior. So guys that probably don't make a ton of money probably don't care. Guys that have more complex contracts that see themselves as more staples of the organization, they say, well, treated him that way, maybe they'll treat me that way. It could. So I guess it just kind of depends on what is your opinion as a player of Russell Wilson. And a lot of these guys understand that business is business. Teams got to manage business. They got to manage business. So a lot of them aren't going to take situations into consideration. Nobody else has a contract on the Denver Broncos the way Russell Wilson had a contract. And, it just depends on who you are. I'm sure it left a bad taste in some guy's mouth. Some guys probably said, get rid of him.
Yeah. So I want to circle back a little bit to the restructure thing, but I also want to ask, obviously, the elephant in the room question, and you're the perfect person possibly to answer this, but let's talk about the restructures in the sense, and because some of the other people I feel like are either, and I've actually seen possibly you talk about this in terms of the difference between maybe like him possibly being a restructure candidate versus an extension candidate. And this is a guy, obviously, that you mentioned in terms of with Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons maybe possibly being an extension candidate versus a restructure candidate. Obviously, you could tell I'm very biased. He's probably my favorite Denver Bronco. I would love for him to retire a Denver Bronco and possibly sign that kind of deal. I will say, maybe in my opinion, I feel like it's far more favorable now that he has a head coach like Sean Payton, that he can possibly finish his career as a Denver Bronco, right? It's maybe a little bit more favorable in that regard because he has Sean Payton here. What in line? Because that's another guy we didn't get a chance to talk about with Simmons. Where do you fall in line with that, right? Like, where do you fall in line with that as him possibly being a restructure, a possible let's move on from Justin Simmons as a trade, or him actually being that extension candidate, which I know that you've talked about?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there's really 4 ways to lower a guy's cap hit. You cut him, you trade him, you make him take a pay, or you restructure him, or you extend him. Because when you extend him, essentially you're going to tack on money as a signing bonus, give him more years on the deal, extend that money out, lower his. It's very similar to a restructure. You're just adding years to the deal. So when you start looking at restructure candidates, now we're going to look at players that are getting extension candidates. We're going to look at players that are getting a little bit older, still potentially cornerstone players for this team. So you think Garrett Bowles, you think Justin Simmons. Garrett Bowles is one of the top left tackles in football. He's got 1 year left on his deal. Do you extend him? Do you cut him to save a lot of money against the cap and roll the dice with a rookie left tackle? Left tackles can generally play a little bit longer. Safeties can generally play a little bit longer. So these are guys that are nearing their early 30s, got 1 year left on their contract. Let's give them a couple extra years. Let's guarantee them an extra year on their contract plus the current year, and let's lower that cap hit that way as opposed to cutting them or trading them. Restructuring doesn't make any sense because they don't have any more years to prorate a bonus against. So the only option is to extend them. Pretty much extend, cut, or trade for those two players. And I think that both Garrett Bowles and Justin Simmons are still going to give you value for a couple more years. I'd be looking to extend those guys at market price deals, guaranteeing 1 extra year, maybe 2 extra years.
Who do you feel
on
is
top
the most,
of this year?
Who do you feel is the most likely candidate between the two? If you had to guess,
Simmons.
Okay.
Simmons the ultimate Bronco.
But before we dive into more about like how the Broncos actually will get to that point of being under the cap, Josh asks another question, and this is about the signing bonus. Is there a limit? Is there a limit to how much of a salary a team can convert to a bonus, or is there a limit on how many players a team can do that with per year?
Nope, not at all. Yes, there is a limit. You have to pay at least the veteran minimum in base salary, which is generally, depending on where they're at in their career, it goes up over time the more years you played. But it's generally $1 million, $1.5 million, something like that. So that's your minimum salary is what you convert to base. Everything else in the salary would go to bonus. So it's the vast majority of it. In terms of how many players you can do it with, no limit. You can do it as many times as you want. As much cash, just means you got to pay out more cash. So that's where having an owner like Rob Walton that is worth $76 billion helps, because cash is never an issue.
Basically, what Steven is trying to say.
Teams that have cash flow problems have problems doing that.
Yeah, and the Broncos under Elway and Joe Willis, they did not have much cash, like, at all. So yeah, it's definitely a good problem to have. But basically, what Steven is trying to say is the Broncos have unlimited amount of times that they can actually do the salary into a bonus. All right, Steven, let's put your Sean Payton hat on, if you will, and let's go through how you can get them under the salary cap. What are the moves that you're making to get them under the salary cap?
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm cutting Russell Wilson. I'm cutting him with a June 1st designation, which means his number doesn't change. His cap number is still $35.4 million. The second move I'm making, I am going to extend Garrett Bowles. I'm going to give him an extra, let's call it, we're going to give him, what do good tackles make? Probably about $18 million a year. I'm going to give him an $18 million signing bonus with a $1 million base salary. And then I'm going to give him 2 extra years. I'll guarantee 1 year at about $20 million. That means I'm essentially guaranteeing him $39 million over 2 years. And then I'll probably give him some $16 million salary in year 3 that is not guaranteed. That's going to bring his cap number down to $11 million. So now we have roughly $5 million to go to get under the cap. I'm going to restructure Zach Allen. $14 million of his base salary gets restructured. That actually puts us in the positive $4 million. That brings his cap number down from $19 million to $9.5 million. I'm also going to restructure Mike McGlinchey. Okay, we're going to do that. That's going to bring his cap number down from about $18 million to $8 million. So now we've got about $14 million in cap space. I'm also giving Justin Simmons an extension. What we're going to do is we're going to give him a very similar extension to what we gave Garrett Bowles. Apologies, I'm doing this in the calculator here that I've got. So we're going to add 2 more years. That's going to bring his cap number down to about $10 million with a Garrett Bowles restructure, Zach Allen and Mike McGlinchey, or Garrett Bowles and Justin Simmons extension, Zach Allen and Mike McGlinchey restructures through, and I cut Tim Patrick, saving me about $9 million. I'm going to trade Jerry Jeudy because I don't think he is part of the plans. That actually saves us $12 million. And I'm probably going to cut DJ Jones and Jarrett Stidham because I don't see them as cornerstones. Now I have about $60 million to go play with in free agency. I've cut Russell Wilson, and we'll be taking a pretty big hit for him next year because we did that post June 1st. I've now kept Garrett Bowles and Justin Simmons as cornerstones of the franchise for the next couple of years. And we have $60 million to go build free agents around a new quarterback.
That means Cortland Sutton is staying. And that means that they have some decent amount of money to work with. So let's kind of dip a little bit into free agency and talk about that now that we're working with that. So let's just work with your let's just work with that. Like, let's just work just for the wizardry that was, and for 60 million. What is your direction that you would want to go with for the Broncos to, for the future under Sean Payton? Because now it's almost like we got the 60 million, right? So now it's almost like we're going to put the Steven opinion on, right? Possibly like how they could possibly work with this. I feel like with 60 million, there's probably a ways that you could at least have a conversation, whether that is going to happen or not. But I feel like it's worth, I guess it's worth having the conversation with Kirk Cousins of him possibly coming to Denver, right? And him possibly coming to Denver in the situation of him signing the deals, right? Like him signing a very lengthy deal. And then him, right, Steven? Do I still have you, or did you freeze on me? Looks like maybe looks like maybe he kind of froze on me a little bit. But yeah, I think that with that 60 million in cap space, the Broncos are going to have a lot to work with. The Broncos are going to have a lot to work with. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. The way that he was able to manipulate that salary cap, I think the Broncos should hire him. He handled that all in like 2 minutes. So absolutely, it was maybe he's selling himself short, and thinking he's not a wizard, because that was wizardry work, right? From Steven with that salary cap. So I'm curious to see what the Broncos are going to be able to do. But yeah, I think that for the Broncos, if they have that amount of money, they're going to have a lot to work with. They're going to have a lot to work with the money and the situation that they're going to have at hand. You're going to have, I think, positions that you can, certainly operate from. You can have, you can basically go through a lot of different situations. I think with the 60 million in space, or really anything, you could probably work through with anything. You back?
Am I back?
Looks like you're back.
It's hotel internet.
Well, no, I was gonna say, like, either the feed didn't like the fact that you solved the Broncos issues in 2 minutes, or as Josh said, Raiders Nation basically came in and hacked the feed. I mean, like. So, but
like I said, every team's got a cap guy that's doing this, and with a lot more thought than me. So I guarantee the Broncos have a good plan here. Yeah, I think before I dropped off, you were asking where would I spend that money. I think Kirk Cousins is the one quarterback that I would look at as in a long-term starter role. That's a free agent that I would potentially look at, but I would prefer to go young. If you've seen my Twitter at all, I'm a big JJ McCarthy guy. He's young. He's got all the tools. He plays in a pro-style offense, on schedule, off schedule. great on third down, cannon for an arm, tall, fast. He's got it all. He just didn't have to do a lot. And, if you're a coach and you're not handing the ball off when you're averaging 13 yards a handoff, you're a stupid coach if you're throwing the ball in that situation. So don't take the fact that he didn't have to do a lot for the fact that he couldn't do a lot. He's also 20 years old, so he's got a lot of room to grow. That's my guy, and then I'm using that money to build around him like nobody's business, similar to what the 49ers have done around Brock Purdy. I'm going to go out and I'm going to sign a guy like Danielle Hunter. I'm going hard at Chris Jones, although I still don't think you pry him away from the Kansas City Chiefs. But wouldn't that be something?
Let alone a division rival?
I would come with that. Neil Smith did it. I would come hard at Chris Jones with that Walton money and just make it so the Chiefs just can't do it. They could make it very compelling if they wanted to get him. I'd be looking at a Calvin Ridley. And then obviously trying to improve in the draft. So maybe another cornerback. If they've got $60 million to play with, they can go pretty hard in those areas. And then I am investing in a good backup quarterback. I think Jameis Winston would be kind of my guy. Somebody that Sean Payton has familiarity with, that if you have to put him in for a couple games because your guy's down, or JJ's 20 years old and needs a minute. You can go win some football games with Jameis Winston. He might give you headaches because he's going to throw a lot of picks, but he's going to throw a lot of touchdowns too. So he's a guy you can win with if you're playing good defense. Those are the key areas. I'm looking to invest money in areas of value, which is edge rusher, cornerback, inside D line. Those are my positions I'm spending hard on, and going young at quarterback.
One position we didn't get a chance to dive much in, but I'm sure that Big Mike is celebrating, in his own right, and that is that Greg Dulcich, in all of the scenarios that you have been cooking up as far as to get the Broncos into 60 million, Greg Dulcich is still a part of that roster. But that said,
I don't know why you would get. I don't know why you get rid of Greg Dulcich. He doesn't cost anything. He's not on a big contract. He's not due a big contract. He's got time left on his deal. Why not see if that hamstring can hold up for a year? Seems like a heck of a player when he can.
But let's just say, because I feel like maybe another one of those guys who, actually, I think he's a free agent though, is Adam Troutman, and I really don't expect him back. Not necessarily because, but if the Broncos wanted to go out and they wanted to bring in a tight end, who is someone out there on the market that you feel like, that would be cost efficient, would fit Sean Payton's possible scheme, and possibly as a fit, maybe alongside a Greg Dulcich?
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at a couple guys there, like a Dalton Schultz or an Irv Smith. I think those are guys that, I'm not going to sit here and tell you how adequate they are as pass blockers or run blockers, because I just haven't watched them enough. But I think they are competent enough in the pass game to be a good fit for Sean Payton. I think Sean Payton needs to get some guys that can catch the football from that position, because it was just severely lacking. I think they put way too many eggs in the Greg Dulcich basket, knowing that he's got hamstrings that literally could snap at any moment.
As we were praising him just a couple of minutes
ago, when he's on the field, but really, really struggles to do that.
Yeah. Well, I was actually going to bring up his name, but Big Mike actually brought it up. What about a reunion with Noah Fant? that reaction kind of said it all.
Is he good? I don't know.
Yeah.
He's okay. This is why you don't ever draft tight ends in the first round. Third round is the sweet spot for tight end.
I feel like the outlier
tight ends and running backs would never touch him in the first round.
I feel like the outlier this year would probably end up being Brock Bowers, just because in the sense he's not a tight end, right? Like that's the thing. It's like one of the guys that it's actually
I bet you there's a guy that goes in the third round that ends up better than him that we don't even know about.
Is that a bet that you think that someone actually could be better than Brock?
I don't know what the class. I don't really know what the class looks like, but yeah, I mean, what?
So what are the guys that I feel like
Kelsey, Laporta, where all these guys, like where Kittle, look at almost every prominent tight end. Kyle Pitts had a better career than any of them.
Nope.
No.
Vernon Davis.
No. Hawkinson. Nope.
I was gonna say Vernon Davis was the top.
It's
was
the
top
spot.
pick, but I mean, yeah. One name that has
good.
kind of
it's also
sorry, Steven. One of the guys that kind of caught my eye a little bit was I was a bit shocked he was 25 years old for one. The only thing that I would think that would be is a bit of a turnoff is that he would be entering his third team necessarily. But Irv Smith, he's 25 years old. He played with Cincinnati, and I mean, I wouldn't mind the idea of Irv Smith with the Broncos. What say you?
I think he's a good player. Yeah, he was one of the guys I mentioned. He's a good player. I don't think he's gonna, dominate the way you got a Travis Kelce, but those guys are fairly few and far between, and it's great to find them. I'd look to find one of those guys in the draft. Well, adding competent players that make your room better. That's kind of where I'm at with Irv.
Yeah. It is an interesting tight end free agency market though, because there are some names like there are some fascinating names in terms of, do the Chargers actually officially move on from Gerald Everett, right? Do they move on from Gerald Everett? Is it a guy that they can possibly bring him into a divisional rival, right? I mean, I don't know. He is a free agent. Mike Gesicki is another one, but he's 28 years old, coming from New England. The ageless wonder down there in New Orleans is a free agent, Jimmy Graham. But you just wonder, how much time he has left. He did play rather well, given with his age and everything down there with New Orleans. We did mention Irv Smith. It looks like Drew Sample, another Cincinnati tight end, is out there on the market. We did mention Noah Fant's name. Also, Austin Hooper is another name. So it's a curious market. It's a curious market for tight end.
There are some names out there, that's for certain.
Let's go a look, and one of the names that obviously you didn't get a chance to mention, but I would imagine may end up moving elsewhere, and that is Josie Jewell. One of the things that I feel like the Broncos have been leaning towards, and we mentioned a few times on 5280 and even on Manely Broncos, is that it feels like the Broncos are leaning more toward Drew Sanders being at the edge instead of on the inside, or opposite of Alex Singleton. That would mean that the Broncos probably have to find a starter opposite of Alex Singleton again. So who is someone on that linebacking free agents that you could possibly bring in? Let me just say that should they go the route that the ESPN guy Matt Bowen recommended, which is spend about roughly $20 million a year for a guy by the name of Patrick Queen, who's a free agent there on the market.
Yeah, that is an option. I don't think that is the route I would go. I like to spend money on value positions. I don't think that inside linebacker is a great value position. That is a position where you can get a guy that, like Alex Singleton, that, was cost next to nothing and can come and lead the league in tackles. That's the type of position that is similar to running back, similar to tight end, not something I'm going to go out and pay gigantic money for. But if they've got $60 million and they draft a rookie, J.J. McCarthy, you know what? I'm here for it. I'm here for getting better. So if they want to go and spend on a guy like Patrick Queen, go spend on a guy like Patrick Queen. There's some other options out there. There's also your draft picks that you can get.
Right.
So there's lots of options of inside linebacker that I think could satisfy that loss of Josie Jewell. But yeah, I don't see Josie coming back.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because we just named a dog after him.
Well, you mentioned one option, and that's the one that you would heavily go after, with it being is 60 million and 60 million in cap space. But I feel like there would be another quarterback, that I would almost, throw into that, into that conversation as well. Is that if you don't get a Kirk Cousins, it probably wouldn't hurt to reach out to another quarterback who probably could have been a Denver Bronco in 2018. In terms of that whole Case Keenum discussion, which we won't rehash at some point, by any means, as we're kind of doing now. But
Josh
Baker
Allen?
Mayfield. Yeah. Baker Mayfield is also.
We didn't have a chance at Baker. We were never getting up to one. We didn't pass on Baker.
Well, we had a chance
on Josh Allen. If we can get Josh Allen, that'd be really good.
Well, I was going to say we had a chance. We had a chance for Baker until, was it the last 2 months of the draft process where things were starting to come out after the Senior Bowl. That Mayfield's going number one.
Baker.
But would you go after him?
I don't know. No, I wouldn't. I don't think you're going to get the return on that investment. I think Baker's a fine quarterback. I don't think he's in that tier 1, tier 2 type of quarterback. I think he's someone you need a pretty dang good roster around. I think he had that in Tampa, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They had a lot of weapons and also pretty good defense. Not to say he didn't play very well. He did. He's just not that kind of guy that I'm going to go pay the money he's going to command to. I would rather go young. I think Kirk Cousins is the one guy that I can be talked into not going young and feel good about the Broncos' chances based on the way he plays and the way Sean Payton coaches. But I can't see them not pulling the trigger on a first-round quarterback this year.
Let me work you through the situation that I feel like the Broncos are probably heading. In terms of the quarterback position, I should say, with free agency. I feel like Sean Payton had this year in mind, even with the whole Russell Wilson, accepting him on the roster, right? Having him on the roster. And so I feel like with Jarrett Stidham, it seems like when we looked at it and we saw the contract that he signed, it was a bit alarming. Why did they sign him to a $10 million deal, for a couple years, right? Why did they sign him to this deal? I feel like it was almost for this year in mind as well, to possibly start a few games. So I feel like it's going in the route of Jarrett Stidham will probably start a few games, but I also feel like they're going to be looking into free agency for a quarterback. The guy that I've had in mind, funny enough, is the guy from that same draft class of Baker Mayfield. But that would be a guy that's also coming from the Mike Shanahan tree now and the Brian Greasy tree down there in San Francisco, and a guy by the name of Sam Darnold. I was more leaning toward the room of, you have Stidham on the roster, you sign Sam Darnold to a very cheap deal, which he's not going to be expensive by any means. He's not going to be expensive. You bring him in. Doesn't even take you at all from the ability to draft your quarterback at 12, right? Then you have your young quarterback, if you will, that you signed in free agency. You have your young quarterback that you drafted that you feel like is going to be your guy, right? And you basically can kind of have those two guys duke it out while Jarrett Stidham at least holds it afloat for at least a few games. And then whoever it is that you feel like is that guy, which we would venture to guess is going to be your draft pick, ends up taking over and doing some of those games. And I feel like that guy is going to be either a J.J. McCarthy or possibly a Bo Nix.
Yeah. I mean, they could go that route. I think having Darnold and Stidham is kind of redundant. If you want to, you know, let them battle it out in camp for either the. I mean, if they want to start, fine. But having both of them on the roster with a young quarterback, I don't see the purpose in that other than to take reps away from your young guy in practice. So, if you want to have a camp battle between, JJ McCarthy's either going to be one or two. Say it's JJ, either one
Yeah.
or two. He'll be either the number one or the number two. So you're basically putting Darnold and Stidham in a position to battle for either the starting job or the backup job. But they're not going to be a number three. I just don't see the purpose of having all of them on the roster. I'd prefer Darnold over Stidham. I'm with you there. I don't see why you need both those guys if you're drafting a quarterback at number 12 or somewhere in the first round.
Is there a position that you feel like that the Broncos so much attention has been made of, the quarterback position and, let alone even the wide receiver position. Like, is there a position that you feel like maybe the Broncos could target maybe a little bit favorable compared to some of the others?
I think that, I think edge rusher and inside D line needs to be a target. This team just did not pressure the quarterback nearly enough last year, and that's got to change. They got to find a way to get pressure without manufacturing pressure, and that was the huge problem. There's a reason why that 2015 team was so special. It's because they could get home with 4 or 5 all day long from anywhere on that defensive line, whether it be at the edge or inside. And then they had the secondary to lock them down and create those turnovers. You got a strong secondary here. You got Pat Surtain, you got Justin Simmons, maybe a PJ Locke back in free agency. We can only hope. You got you got good players there in the secondary, but it doesn't really matter if you can't get pressure because any quarterback in the league is going to carve you up if they got time to sit back there.
All right. Well, this has been absolutely amazing, man. I know we were kind of like right at that hour. I learned a lot. I mean, I hope the people that are in the comments learned a lot, especially regarding the salary cap. Obviously, it's nice to pick your brain a little bit in terms of free agency and what the Broncos could possibly do, maybe either with your $60 million or possibly even like what they actually might do, maybe not with that $60 million. And I know that even people in the chat appreciate the fact that you actually solved world peace with these Denver Broncos in 2 minutes and getting them to $60 million in cap space.
Yeah, I'd like to just save my Twitter feed. I'm not saying they're going to get you $60 million in cap space. I'm saying they can if they want to.
Yeah,
my guess is they get to somewhere closer to 20 or 30. Yeah. I'm guessing they get somewhere closer to 20 or 30, and they make 1 or 2 big signings.
Yeah. It seems like that is kind of where it's trending, right? Is that you probably will get 1 big signing or, even 1 to 2 big signings. But I guess like it, I guess that's
I really
all.
like that hashtag, by the way. Kris for GM. Yes, I would love to make that kind of money.
You would be set. You would be set for life. I mean, I feel like almost at that point, you would almost put your resignation in at that point once you got that contract.
That's right. It would be my.
Oh man, but I just want to thank you again, man. And hopefully here soon we can link up and we can maybe not necessarily talk about some Broncos related stuff, but yeah, we can just kind of hang out and shoot the breeze a little bit. So yeah, it was nice having you on, man.
Definitely appreciate you having me. It's always a good time being on here. So really appreciate it.
Yeah. Why don't you give the people a look, if you will, as far as where they can follow you on Twitter, and possibly, maybe pick your brain a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. At @skris, first initial last name, PO. Still got the old predominantly orange. at the end of that hashtag. So at @SChrisPO, hit me up. I love talking to you guys. My wife doesn't care for it as much because she wonders who I'm talking to all the time. So I got to talk to my stranger friends. But it's always a great time conversing with you guys on Twitter, and I like to have fun with it. I'm not really as big an asshole as I probably seem like I am on there. So, but I forgot we were live. I shouldn't say that.
No, you're good. Hey, thanks to Zach Sigers, we've kind of molded this a little bit into the Manely Broncos Uncensored, which is kind of where things are at. And we've also noticed that it's a way better live stream than it is pre-recorded. So, but Perfect. No, again, yeah. Well, again, like I want to thank you so much for hopping on. You're a great friend for me, and I mean, like I hope at some point we can, be able to work our schedules and find some time to hang out here. Maybe go to a game or, or something. And
we'll at least catch up at camp this year for sure.
Absolutely. For Steven and myself, we want to wish you guys a fantastic show, and make sure you tune in Wednesday, as actually with the NFL Combine coming up here starting on Thursday. We'll do a little bit more of a breakdown from the draft prospects perspective, and hopefully you guys can be in tune for that. So again, thank you guys for tuning in to this Monday edition of the Manely Broncos Podcast.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle.